Hi everyone. I was participating in a game jam this month called the GameDev.tv Game Jam, and uh, basically I had built a devlog before showing off some pretty good progress, but about a week after that, just everything went to hell in a handbasket in this country. So I'm not going to bring any politics into this. I don't think I need to. But I was not able to focus at all. So I just feeling for the people who've been hurt. So that said, what I would like to do is just cover a few things that I did that were pretty cool. And the person who worked with me, his name's Sakasal. He, or Sal perhaps, I'm actually not sure how to pronounce it. He made some wicked music, and it's all CC BY, so you can go pick it up and learn from it. I left a lot of the actual Asaprite files in the folder structure in GitHub, so you can take advantage of that if you want to directly. But that said, a lot of this is just kind of cobbled together. But the few things, I'll just start with a few of the things that are cool, or at least that I think are cool. There's this LineTrail. It's a plugin. This is the first time, as far as I know, that these plugins have been published, so I thought it'd be pretty cool. One thing I noticed about this plugin is you have to, whatever you use it on, you have to make the child resources unique for the node that gets added. And the reason is when you reload this, the values for this line, they are not unique otherwise. So you get the same color throughout. If you're changing colors or if you change the modes, you get all the same values for texture, gradient, that type of thing. So if you do use this, you'll want to make it make resources unique using this guy up here. Make sub resources unique right here. Now that doesn't mean anything here. There's nothing important here. For this midpoint displacement line, this was for an experimental scene that I made. It was going to be sort of a grid-based game where you have some special interesting shots and stuff. And this represented the background. This follows Kids Can Code's midpoint displacement algorithm that he posted about for generating random backgrounds. I did a pretty special thing with this. If you look in, I think it's just world. Yeah, in Parallax Background, you'll notice I have a bunch of Parallax backgrounds, and they all have these midpoint displacement lines in them. They all have different values for them. If you look where it says line start, line end, all that stuff, a lot of different values there and for the Y values. And essentially what happens is it will generate a large, pretty large, basically full screen sized line, and it'll be whatever color you pick down here. So in that case, one is white, one is gray, one is sort of a sandy brown, and the next is sort of a lighter, orangey, more irony, sandy brown. So what that does is it makes layers of them that are in parallax, so you can move back and forth, and they move at different speeds. One that's white looks like sort of like mountaintops, stuff like that, and then it kind of goes from there. This just kind of looks like gray. That is the bottoms of the mountains, or different layers. This one looks like sand that's in the distance, and this one looks a little bit like sand or iron that is up close. Now, as for the next cool-ish thing, I made a universal saver. Now this is weird. But basically, what this code does is if you put anything into this settings group, or into any group that you put in here, into this save groups, and if you make sure the types that you want to save in the engine are defined here, it's got like basis, boolean, color, int, transform, transform 2D, real, string, vector 2, vector 3. Real here is just a float. That's what the type for it is. Looks like some of this might be debug code still, but regardless, when you call save all, this will take your entire current scene tree and save all the things that are in those groups. It'll save the properties out according to what you told it to save. And it's pretty nice. It will save literally the entire scene tree if you tell it to save that, and it'll save all the properties on it that you want to save, the different types and stuff. In my case, I'm using it for the music, so I can show you how that works. This is some of Sakasal's work. It's such good music. You can see some cool stuff I've got there. Now if I turn it down, hit the back button, then escape, come back, you can see, or hear rather, the music is not very loud. The game doesn't have any SFX at the moment, so this doesn't really do anything. But pretty nice little utility. It's actually extremely powerful, and I'll be using that in future games for sure. Next up on the list of cool things are it's actually a custom resource. And it's a custom resource that is unlike any I've ever seen in Godot. And essentially, you put this folder path in. It's just a string. We can take a look at one if we go up to this list, all sheriff's list resource. And all this folder path is, I'm going to do this because it lets me expand this well a little bit more here. All it is a path in your assets to a folder. Now that folder, all it has to do is contain, as you can see, it's this one here, a list of other resources. And the thing about it is, these resources can be anything. As you can see, I've got these descriptions of things. These are my sheriffs, different sheriffs you're allowed to play. They have a whole bunch of different statistics on them. They've got a bunch of different gun scenes and the names and character descriptions, portraits, body shots, their statistics for how they move, stuff like that. All that's contained in these resources. And then I drop them all into this folder. Now, later, I reference this. I reference this in context. Let me show you where that is. If I go to context, in fact, it's context here. We have this. Now I can go find where that's used, Control-Shift-F, and notice I'm just looking through it. Context.allSheriffsListResource.all resources. That's my property. It makes an asset. It makes an array that contains all of the things that were in that folder automatically for you. It loads them at runtime, and just generally that's extremely useful. This is something that is super expandable. You can easily add like a category name, add menu resources if you want. Say, here's where you can find all the items for this menu. You could have it be nested. You can do pretty much anything that you want using this pattern with just this folder list resource. The code for it is actually pretty complicated. and I didn't want to write too much code, because usually as you write more code, it gets to be more error prone. So in this case, I tried to make this as simple as possible, and I think I pulled it off. I think as far as that goes, it's a pretty clean piece of code, even if it's complicated what it's actually doing. But all the work is just done here where it loads it. So if you do have a bunch of nested resources, this can take up a lot of time loading this. I load it for this one in a global place in this context. So what ends up happening is that gets loaded, because context is an autoload singleton, that gets loaded at the beginning of the game. So this gets loaded while the splash screen is up. That is something that I would definitely recommend if you're going to have large things. This one's not particularly large, obviously, just 2. And they're not really that complicated as far as objects go. But if you had, like, say 1,000 different enemy types in your game that you've gone and created all these for, and you want to just load the enemies automatically and not have to preload them or have a dictionary listed of them, or things of that nature, then you would use this resource type that I made in order to make sure that you can just get all those automatically without really any effort. Later you might need to find indexes, so I made this little helper, and you could just preload this other resource, and that's pointing to a specific one. This is actually not as useful as it sounds, but I use it for this right here. Let's see here. You gotta find index in here. Yeah, it's just in the ready function. The idea is this is a screen where you can see all the different sheriffs, and so it does like sort of a carousel-like ability to rotate through them. And I'll show you the game here shortly just to see what it looks like, but that basically does that. I don't have it showing the stats, as you can see, but whatever. Next up, as far as coolness goes, I've got my random dungeon generator. This is covered under the same license. Basically, what this does is allows you to randomly generate dungeons. This also follows Kids Can Code's tutorial for it on his YouTube site. I definitely recommend checking it out if you haven't. You can just look for procedural generation Kids Can Code, and you'll find that right away. There are some experiments in here, different things. One thing that I did originally that I thought was pretty clever was I figured out a way to solve auto tiling in isometric views. I should say isometric tile maps. And I thought it was pretty complicated. I made a video on it. It was very, very long. But if you're interested in that, I definitely recommend you go check it out on YouTube. You can probably just search isometric auto tile, and it'll probably come up. So I don't have much prepared here, but there are some cool things anyway. Alright, so I'm just going to run it now and actually show you how it works. You'll notice here, by the way, got these things that are called props. It's also like just things that show up in the game. This will include barriers, this will include enemies, this will include all sorts of things. So the cool thing about it is, well, let me just play the game here. And you can see I haven't finished the stats view, but whatever. I'm going to go with Sheriff Dan for now. This is the go button. We hit that. It auto-generates everything. Looks decent. And we have enemies that pop out and shoot. Sheriff Dan has a shotgun. Now the thing that's preventing me from going out here is actually these sandy looking things here. And what that does, or what I did was, I said after you're done generating this tile map, go back, look at all the tiles that were used, and if you find a tile that has nothing to a side of it, fill it in with one of these tiles. And then I put the collision shapes on these tiles here, on the sandy tiles. And the reason for that is the actual collision shape for the for these tiles is really hard to define. So I didn't want to bother. These guys don't die yet. In fact, they don't do anything yet. They're just sort of dumb zombie-like characters. You'll notice right now the tile map generator 2 has a bug. I didn't have time to fix that. But not really a huge deal either. Well, that one is though. I was fully expecting there to be a lot more out there. Somewhere over there. But anyway, one of the other cool things, and this is really probably the last thing I'm going to mention here, is this thing called completed. Now the completed signal, something I've talked about a little bit before, but it's actually a pretty advanced signal to take advantage of. And the reason it is pretty advanced is it's really hard to find in the documentation when this signal can possibly be emitted. The cool thing about it, as it turns out, is let's go look at this generate dungeon. Notice how I have a yield in here. One of the aspects of yield is when it gets to a point where it needs to take some time to do something, it can do that, and it'll take all the stuff that's remaining after that and return it as what they call a coroutine. Now, how does it know what's left? It has to have an object to store what's left. That object is what gets returned by yield here to, or from this function. So this is actually the yield for make rooms, saying completed, means that make rooms itself must have a yield in it. And here it is. You can see it right here. Now, when this one times out, it'll continue with the rest of this until it gets to this yield. This yield also returns something that has the remainder of this piece in it, so this path. So you can see that when this goes off, or when this yield hits, it returns the rest of this. Then when this yield happens, when it finally returns a timeout, it runs the rest of this until it gets to here. And then it waits an idle frame and it tries to make the path. And it does this by using the complete signal. The complete signal, essentially, is on what gets returned by the yield, which is it's a very interesting, I don't think you can actually see this, a very interesting signal, because there's an object that is like something like game function state or something along those lines. I forget exactly what it is, but regardless, it has that signal, and it's sort of a generic signal that says when any function that has yields in it is done running, return that complete, emit that complete signal. And so it doesn't matter, for example, I could wait 20 idle frames, I could wait 12 seconds instead of 1.2, I could wait 20 seconds, I could wait 3.5 seconds. It doesn't matter. When this is done being called, it'll emit this completed and allow this to continue. And so then MakeMap will run. Now MakeMap, if you come down and look at it, it's a pretty complicated little algorithm here. It doesn't appear to have any yields in it. What that means is this won't actually ever emit completed, because it doesn't ever have to do a partial run of any of the code in here. So this, you cannot look for emitting, or you cannot yield the completed signal, because it doesn't know what it is coming from this normal function. You'd have to add your own yield to do whatever you wanted if you ever, like if you don't want the editor to scream at you, basically, for saying, I don't know what the completed signal is. Okay, and that's more or less the last cool thing. For the props, I just go and pick kind of a random tile out that is ensured to be used, and I throw a random prop into it. That includes enemies. I rotate it randomly, -10 to 10 degrees, and let it go. I put it at the position that is from the map but in the world, and that is pretty close to it. Yeah, there's not really anything else here that's interesting right now. In fact, I think the crowning achievement of this thing entirely is pretty much the folder list resource, believe it or not. That is my favorite aspect of this project, and I think it's actually going to change how I make games, because now you can have some pretty cool stuff going and load everything all at once. So instead of having to manage a separate dictionary or array of datas and saying, well, I have to go remember to write in preload and put in the path to it, you just put everything in the same folder, and this will preload, well, not preload it, but it'll load it for you. And that, to me, immediately, as long as you design for it, is far superior to managing everything with a separate piece of code. You've probably seen places where that happens, where they have another autoload singleton, but you just have a list of preload or load in it, and you have to reference everything either by some key, a string, or maybe the resource itself, and there's just a whole lot of mess. Now, the other thing this folder path, this folder resource is good for is any sort of hierarchical data. That includes inventories also. So you can customize this very easily to make a custom inventory if you want to. And I'm probably going to make a video showing that at a little bit later date. All right, that's all I really wanted to show for now. Hopefully, even though I didn't really get much done on this because this month has been an absolute nightmare for Black people across America, as well as anyone who got COVID. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Hopefully some of the code here anyway is going to be useful to people. You can also see how I made the isometric auto tiles. I'll probably include, well, I'm not even going to include links to it. This is not even going to be a highly edited video. So I think that's all for now. So thank you all for listening. Hopefully, well, actually, let me talk real quick about things I learned. One, don't bite off so much that you can't chew it. The game I had was really aggressive. Granted, I didn't know we were going to hit all this bonkers stuff. I also need to better estimate my work, because at my job, I'm a pretty important guy. Not to brag or anything. What that means is I have very little time left, if I'm not being paid to do game development, to actually take on really significant projects. I'm hoping to make a course here, an advanced Godot course, soon enough, but I'm still kind of collecting all my thoughts and putting together stuff, and that would be something that I would have to be paid for. So we'll see what comes about from that. You will see more things like this folder path, things that are insanely useful. I'm planning to bring a lot of that, and possibly even the course if I'm feeling particularly free, let's say. But we'll see what happens. I'm not really sure right now at this point how I want to handle it. Okay. Yeah, I think that's going to be it for now. Thank you all. Love you. And I'll see you next time.